There is a specific kind of exhaustion that nobody talks about. It is not the tiredness that comes from working too hard or sleeping too little. It is something quieter and somehow much heavier. It is the exhaustion that settles into your chest when you realize again, for what feels like the 100th time, that someone you poured yourself into has walked away like you were never anything more than a rest stop on their journey. They took your time, your energy, your sleepless nights of worry for them, your carefully chosen words, your loyalty that you would never have offered to just anyone, and then they left. Or worse, they stayed and turned cold. Or even worse than that, they started treating you like the problem. And here you are, still trying to figure out what you did wrong. I want to sit with you in that feeling for a moment, because I think you have spent a long time being told to simply move on, to forgive, to stop being so sensitive, to understand that people are just like that. And maybe you have tried. Maybe you have forgiven more times than most people would believe. Maybe you have extended benefit of the doubt so far and so often that it has become a reflex, almost automatic, like breathing. And still something inside you keeps asking the same question that you might be almost ashamed to admit you are asking. Why does this keep happening to me? That question is not a sign of weakness. That question is actually the beginning of one of the most important things you will ever understand about yourself and the way you move through the world. So let us talk about it honestly. Not with platitudes, not with vague advice about setting boundaries that makes it sound as simple as putting up a fence. But really honestly, with the kind of conversation you deserve to have with someone who actually sees you. Here is the first thing I want you to know, and I need you to really let this land. The people who betray you are not always villains. I know that might be frustrating to hear, because it would almost be easier if they were. It would be cleaner. But the truth is more complicated, and ultimately more freeing than that. What is actually happening in most of these situations follows a pattern rooted deep in psychology, a pattern that has everything to do with how you give, not just with how they receive. You are someone who feels things at a different frequency than most people. You walk into a room and you already know who is hurting before they say a single word. You absorb the emotional atmosphere of a conversation the way a sponge absorbs water, totally, completely, without much choice in the matter. When someone you care about is struggling, something inside you activates. It is not just empathy in the abstract sense. It is this almost physical pull toward that person, this urgent sense that you need to help, that something will go wrong if you do not step in, that your presence and your effort and your giving might be the thing that holds them together. And so you give. You give generously, freely, with your whole heart. You show up. You listen. You offer more than you were asked for. You sacrifice your own needs, sometimes your own sleep, sometimes your own peace of mind, because this person matters to you and you want them to know that. You want them to feel it. Here is what psychology tells us about what happens next. When one person consistently gives without limit and another person consistently receives without reciprocating, a very specific dynamic takes root. The person receiving begins, unconsciously in most cases, to see the giver not as an equal, but as a resource. This is not a moral failure on their part, though it can become one if they are aware of it and choose it anyway. It is a deeply human response to a dynamic that was never balanced to begin with. We treat people according to the role they occupy in our lives. And when someone occupies the role of unconditional supplier, something in the human brain begins to categorize them that way. Not as a peer, not as someone with their own needs and limits and bad days, but as a source. Think about how you think about a lamp. You do not worry about what the lamp needs. You just expect it to give light when you flip the switch. You do not feel grateful to the lamp, and you would probably be confused and even annoyed if the lamp one day refused to turn on. You gave it electricity. You installed it. Why is it not doing its job? I am not saying the people in your life are thinking of you this way consciously. Most of them are not sitting there plotting, but the psychology is real, and it plays out in ways that are absolutely recognizable if you have been in this kind of dynamic. They start to take your presence for granted. They stop asking how you are doing. They call when they need something and go quiet when they do not. And when you finally reach a point where you have nothing left to give, when you set a boundary or express a need or show up with your own struggle for once, the relationship buckles. Sometimes it breaks. And somehow, impossibly, you are the one who feels like the betrayer. Does that sound familiar? Because that specific experience, that feeling of being the villain, simply for having needs, is one of the most disorienting and painful things a person like you can go through. Let us go a little deeper, because there is something underneath all of this that I think you need to hear. You did not learn to give this way by accident. Somewhere, probably very early in your life, you received a lesson. It may not have been spoken out loud. Most of the most powerful lessons we receive are not. But you learned, through experience, that your value was connected to your usefulness. That love was something you earned, rather than something you simply deserved. That the safest way to matter to someone, the most reliable way to ensure that they would stay, was to make yourself indispensable. To be the one who always shows up. To be the person nobody else could be for them. And you were good at it? You are still good at it. That skill, that capacity for empathy and giving and showing up, it is genuinely extraordinary. The world needs people like you. But here is where it gets complicated, and this is the part one wants you to really hold. A gift that is given compulsively, given from a place of fear rather than freedom, given because you do not feel safe unless you are giving, stops being purely a gift. It becomes a transaction. Even when the other person does not know that. Even when you do not know that. When you give from that place, from that anxious, generous place of I must be needed or I will lose this person, you are not setting up a friendship or a relationship. You are setting up a dynamic, and dynamics have their own logic, their own gravity, that pulls people into roles they may not even be aware they are playing. You become the helper. They become the helped. And that asymmetry, over time, does something corrosive to the relationship, to the way they see you, and quietly and devastatingly, to the way you see yourself. Because here is something that rarely gets said: when you never let someone take care of you, when you are always the strong one, always the one with the answers, always the one holding it together, you are actually preventing intimacy. Real intimacy requires mutual vulnerability. It requires two people who sometimes show their wounds, who sometimes need to be carried, who sometimes do not have the answer, and say so. When you are always the giver, always the capable one, you are building a one-way mirror instead of a window. They can see themselves in you, they can use the reflection you offer them, but they never really see you. And when they do not see you, they cannot value what they cannot see. So the betrayal, when it comes, is not always a betrayal of you specifically. Sometimes it is simply the inevitable collapse of a dynamic that was never sustainable, that was never actually an equal relationship, even if it looked like one from the outside. That does not mean it hurts less. It hurts enormously. But understanding it differently gives you something that blame alone can never give you: power. The power to change the pattern. Now I want to talk about something specific, something that I think might make you uncomfortable, but that I am going to say with all the warmth I have, because I genuinely believe you need to hear it. There is a part of you that chose these dynamics, not consciously, not because you wanted to be hurt, but because there was something familiar in them, something that felt at some level like home. People who grow up needing to earn love, who learn that being helpful is how you stay safe, are not randomly assigned to relationships where they give too much. They are drawn to people who need a lot, and people who need a lot are drawn to them. It is like two magnets finding each other across a room, not random, not accidental, but pulled together by something invisible and very powerful. The person who is always in crisis feels finally understood by the person who always wants to help, and the person who always wants to help finally feels needed, finally feels like they have a clear and important role, finally feels the particular comfort of knowing that they matter in a specific and urgent way. Both people get something. For a while it works, until it does not. And when it stops working, the person who was always in crisis often moves on to find a new helper. Not because they are cruel, though sometimes they are, but because the dynamic required a certain distance between you, a certain imbalance. And once that imbalance started to shift, once you started to ask for more or give less, the dynamic could not hold. The relationship was never built on mutual knowing. It was built on complementary need. I want you to grieve that for a moment, because it deserves to be grieved. The relationship you thought you had, the closeness you believed was real, in many of these cases it was real in your heart and much shallower in theirs. Not because you are foolish, not because you missed obvious signs, but because you loved with the full depth of who you are, and they were only capable of something much smaller. That is a painful truth, and it is also, eventually, a liberating one. Because once you understand this, You can start to ask different questions. Not just why did they do this to me, but what in me was drawn to this situation? What did I get from being the helper? What did I avoid feeling when I was focused on their pain instead of my own? What does it mean about my own sense of worth that I only felt secure when I was needed? These questions are not accusations. They are doorways, and walking through them is the real work, the work that changes not just your next relationship, but every relationship that comes after. Let me tell you what it can look like on the other side of this work, because I do not want to leave you in the hard part without pointing toward the light. When you begin to understand that your worth is not contingent on your usefulness, something in how you give begins to shift. You stop giving from depletion and start giving from overflow. You learn the difference between offering your strength and surrendering your safety. You begin to notice early when a dynamic is forming that puts you in the caretaker role with no reciprocity. And instead of pushing through, instead of giving more in the hope that they will eventually see you, you get curious. You slow down. You let a little silence exist and see who fills it. You start to value relationships that feel like a conversation between two people rather than a service transaction. You stop interpreting someone's need for you as love because you finally understand that need and love are not the same thing. Need can end the moment it is met. Love wants to stay. You start to let people in on your bad days. You start to say, I am not doing well. And wait to see who leans in instead of pulling back. And you discover that the people who lean in, the ones who actually want to know the real you and not just the useful version of you, those people are out there. They were always out there. But you were too busy performing capability to let them see where you were soft. This is not a small shift. I want to be honest about that. If you have been operating from this pattern for most of your adult life, it is going to feel deeply uncomfortable to change it. Receiving care might feel wrong at first, almost like a trick. Saying no might feel like abandonment. Showing your weakness might feel like a collapse. Your nervous system will protest. It will tell you that you are doing something dangerous, something that will cost you love, because that is what it learned. But your nervous system is not telling you the truth. It is telling you an old story. A story that made sense once and has long since stopped serving you. The work is to feel the discomfort and stay with the new behavior anyway. To say I am not going to rescue this person and feel the anxiety of that and not give in to it. To say I need support right now and feel exposed and wait anyway. To choose relationships where you are not the only one rowing and feel the strange peace of finally being truly accompanied. And here is what I want you to carry with you after this conversation. The people who betrayed you did not betray you because you loved too much. They did so because the foundation was built on an inequality that could not hold. And you kept building on that foundation because somewhere deep down you believed that being indispensable was the closest thing to being loved that you were allowed to have. You were wrong about that. Not because you are naive or broken, but because you were taught something that was never true, and you have been faithful to that teaching at an enormous cost to yourself. You are allowed to be loved without earning it. You are allowed to take up space, to have needs, to be struggling, and still be worthy of someone showing up for you. You are allowed to give from a place of genuine free choice, rather than quiet fear. And the relationships that survive that shift, the ones that can hold the full and complex and needy and powerful and vulnerable person that you actually are, those are the only relationships worth building anyway. So the next time you feel that familiar pull, that urgent hunger to help, that anxiety when someone seems to need you and you have not yet given enough, I want you to pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, am I giving this because it is genuinely mine to give, or am I giving this because I am afraid of what happens if I do not? That question will not always be easy to answer, but the fact that you are asking it at all means you are already changing. And change, real change, does not announce itself loudly. It happens in these small, quiet moments of self-recognition, in the pause before the old pattern, in the choice to stay with yourself instead of immediately rushing towards someone else. You have spent so long taking care of everyone else. It is time, gently and with great patience, to start coming home to yourself.